thought I'd try and record the sound to this after the event. A few folk have asked me to do it, see if it makes things any easier to hear. So what I'm doing here is a back of a greave, and the measurements to take for this aren't many, to be honest, and this is the sort of front plane, if you like, of what I do. So you have the central line, that just makes so I don't drift off too far, and then what I've taken is the circumference, sort of finger tight, of the person, of their shin. The 14.5 is just under the knee where the patella tendon is. The next one is the widest part, the next one is the base of that muscle, and then at the ankles. So I've got the measurements on the left in inches, and what I do first of all when I'm trying to work out the pattern is add 2 inches to those. The final greaves I want about 1 inch bigger in circumference than the person's muscles. So this is the maths that's behind it. So first of all I add +2 to each measurement that I've taken, and then I half it. This will give me the total width of the pattern we'll see shortly at these 4 points. So it's just handy to have these measurements on hand for reference. The maths doesn't need to be too accurate. I would suggest to within 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch, realistically, because you can trim things. If ever you're worried, you go a bit larger, which is why I go +2 inches. Just in the camera a wee bit there. There'll be a lot of that to come. And then what I do is I half it again. This is because I want to see how far each one of these measurements has to go to that middle line that I've drawn. Now I don't have in this one the distance of how I get to the top to the bottom of the length of the shin, but basically it's from the patella tendon to about 1/2 an inch above where the foot emerges from the shin is what I use as a measurement, but just take your own and see what you fancy. So you can see there I've got ish written on the side because it's not that big a deal. So here's the pattern. Now this is an old pattern that I did when I did my apprenticeship with Dave at White Rose, and I've just kept it because most shins, unless the person is outlandishly large, will be more or less around this, and you'll see at the end that the difference is so minute from the shin that I've taken that pattern from. I needn't really have drawn this, but you know, it makes for a good video. So there's what I start with. I've got an old successful pattern, just about, and there's one of the changes I've made. I found I tended to split that middle bit when I first started, so I added that material, making it easier to cut, to make sure those splits didn't travel into the greave. But now that doesn't tend to happen, but it's just a habit I've formed. And you can see there the 4 measurements vaguely where they'll be on the pattern, from just below the knee through the widest part of the muscle, just where that starts to grow out, and the ankles, or just around the ankles, just above I think normally. And you can see I'm trying to show here that the measurements there are the 4 1/8. I'm just putting out there, and I just make a mark on the existing pattern so I can clearly see that, and I make my way down across the whole pattern, repeating the process, or making a mistake which I just picked up. I was copying the same measurements, but here we go. Look, my fantastic sign language. You can see that I was getting that wrong, and it should in fact be that one. So there we go. So we've got the 8.5, which is 4 1/4. So I measure 4 1/4 inches out from that edge, and that will give me the rough gauge of the shin. Now things have changed since I started doing this, because we take a lot of casts now of people's limbs, which to begin with wasn't really available when I started, or perhaps it was, we just didn't know about it, and now use a product called Ortho Tape. Thank you, Fred, Royal Armouries, for the shout on that. It's a great thing, and what it means is I've got the customer essentially in the workshop with me, so I can check things like the width and depth as I go, but I do have those measurements, and I just have to trust the calipers on that, whereas now I can actually offer it up for a first fitting on a model of the person's leg. And all I'm doing there, look, is just smoothing out those lines that I've taken. You can see a bit narrower at the top and a bit broader at the bottom, or the middle, than the original. But as you'll see in just a moment, the difference is that minuscule. Off that up to the camera, it isn't worth shouting about. you can gain or lose that by cutting it with a grinder, or by expanding it by stretching the material into it. So we'll get that cut out, and cut out of the metal as well. So when I've got my metal cut, this is 16 gauge mild steel. In this instance, I mark my center line just so I don't drift off as I'm working. Don't want that to happen. And I mark more or less where the top is actually going to be beyond that salvage I've created there. And I've realised I can't see it in chalk very well, so I redo it in Sharpie. Sharpie survives fire, surprisingly well, but chalk does a bit of a better job, but doesn't survive the hammering quite so well. So anyway, there's our middle line, and I've forgotten what I do next, so we'll just watch the video. There we go, there's me explaining about that. So that's that salvage that I've put in, so it doesn't crack, or the cracks, if they do appear, don't drift into the metalwork later. But it doesn't tend to happen now, but it happened a lot at the beginning. I beat the living hell out of the work. So just for the purpose of the video here, I tend to sort of pop in a little circle, vaguely like that. And you'll see what that's for in a moment when we get hammering. But it's where I'm going to dish the material. And the same down the bottom there. And importantly, down the bottom, you can see it goes on to the flanges, if you want to call them that, of the side of the pattern we have there. And these will be drifted down and around. And it's important, you'll see later, to hit as much of the material as you can and start to teach you where you want it to go. Don't leave those edges that I've marked there flat. Otherwise, you'll have this lovely curve, and it will just turn into a straight line there, and you won't be able to get that lovely shape that we're after as we make the greave. I'm just putting the line in with a scribe now, so that we can see it as we work, or I can as I work, just to check I've not drifted off too far to the left or right. And also, importantly, I can see which side of the metal I'm working, because later on that can become quite important. So I've started to dish the work there. It doesn't look like there's much heat on it, but it's under quite a strong lamp, so it's quite a nice red-orange when you see it in reality. And what I'm doing is I'm adding some dishing into it now. Now this isn't the only way to make these greaves. I've seen people do different ways, reducing it from the other side and so on. This is just the way I was taught, and it works well enough for me. So I'm dishing it there, and I'm trying to take that dishing, although not so deep, right the way to the sides, you'll see in a minute, right the way to the sides of the material, to the edges, because it creates a far more homogeneous curve and bulge to the work, rather than having a sort of dished bit and then a couple of flats at the side. The curves start really from the center and run out. They're not just close up to the edge and then the edges fold over. You're trying to avoid that. So any hammer will do. There's nothing clever to this hammer, it's just a nice rounded one. So it doesn't turn the back of the greave, in this case, into a bag of marbles, or too much of one. In fact, I use this a lot for planishing as well, this hammer. Now I'm not going too far to the top, you'll notice. There we go, because what I want to do is I want to create a curve, because that's got to return over the muscle into the back of the knee. And when I do go up there to hit it, what I tend to do is lift with the tongs the other end up, to try to preserve that shape. I don't want it going up flat at the back. It's supposed to cup quite comfortably on the back of the muscle of the calf. Now we'll drop a bit into the front. I've noticed as well my swage blocks picked up a rock on this, backwards and forwards. It's not normally like that, but there we go. Now the kick here at the back, where the heel finds some room, we want to put that in, but it isn't just in that middle bit. It goes down onto those two side pieces as well, the flanges or the legs there. That are visible, so you want to make sure you're moving those as well and starting to teach them where they need to go. I don't really go as deep as I should have done on this bit of work, this preliminary stuff here. I think because I was just anxious, because it's the first video I've done in quite a while. I'd like it to have been about an inch deeper, and then later you'll see I have to knock it back in which is a pain, and I needn't have done that if I'd done it properly. I've seen Kevin Legg make greaves, and he just bashes where that crease is appearing. Kev pretty much just bends the thing to 90 degrees and then works it back from there, and it worked well for him, and it was a lot quicker than the technique I use, but I haven't quite got the bottle to do it. So I need to see Kev do that a few more times before I was to try it. And this is the way I was shown, and it works well for me. So we're just trying to teach it to get that crease in there. I'm pushing the work with my left hand down so that it's got a bit deeper into this bowl, just an upturned oxygen cylinder base. Back into the heat there, make things a bit simpler for me. Heat is your friend, particularly when making greaves if you want nice smooth shapes. So there we go, work the other side now, push that down. They'll keep trying to close in, it looks like makes me think of a crab's claw. Just push them back down and don't let any creases appear. I really push that metal down with my left hand so I can push it down further with the hammer. There we go, just swap into a lighter hammer there to get that down. And I really didn't push the end of that in the middle down far enough, and it bites me a bit later. I keep it in the middle just to start to try and teach it I want that curve to go that way. There we go, you can see the finished piece here. So we've got a bulge in one side, and at the bottom there I would have liked that to have been about 1 inch deeper at the end, but hey ho, live and learn. Now this is the tool that I use to make my greaves over. It's just an old scaffold, a steel scaffold pole that I've welded rather badly a stake into there so that it will go into this, and it just happens that that locks off quite nicely there, like that. That's all there is to it. It was a bit steeper on the curve, but over the years it's gone a bit flatter, but there you go. Now this is the front that I've made, and there's the ortho tape that I mentioned, and what I'm doing here is I'm trying to remind myself about this sweep. It's important when you make greaves, they're not just straight up and straight down, they aren't drain pipes. And just where I'm touching there and the instep, there's a couple of places I like to get a little bit of contact if I can with the customer, because it helps grip the greave and give them a security it's not going to fall down their leg. The greave oughtn't to need to be stapled up to the crease. It should grip nicely in those areas and on the back as well. But what's important here, I'm trying to get in my mind's eye, is what side that sweep is on the back of the greave. I have many a time made 2 right hand sides or 2 left hand sides of the backs of the greaves because I haven't paid attention in this section. So I go through this process to make sure I don't screw it up. So there you go. You'll see why this is important in a minute. That's where I'll do most of my hammering. So first of all, the rock's really obvious here now on the swage, but there we go. We'll learn to live with it. I'm just starting to teach the bit of metal that I want it to curve now in this direction. I'm just trying to sort of, however I need to do that, just to sort of gently get it to start to understand that's the direction we want it to go. And you can see there the 2 top corners haven't really been worked that well quite yet, so they're a bit flat. That's what I was talking about earlier, and those flats will sort of do strange things to the metal as the stresses move through it, and you won't get smooth corners, smooth curves. So it's important to work the whole of the piece of steel. So it's a bit like a bag of marbles, or bag of crushed glass by the time you're done. You can see there, look, my kick out hasn't quite come out far enough. Now, we're back into that curve. When I'm bending this around the stake, I will work that side where the curve is about 4 or 5 times more frequently than the side without it. And by doing that, I will push that material down into the slight curve that's on the pipe, and essentially shrink it a bit, I suppose. Yeah, possibly, I don't know, but it will bend it into it, and that will create a curve to the whole piece, which is what's needed to cut the leg well. And you could see it on the greave front, what that ends up looking like. Now at times like this I have to remind myself to trust the process, because this is really looking like a dog's dinner at the minute, and I do make a bit of a meal of the bit where the heel's going to go because I didn't do my prep well enough. That was my fault. But it shows you can get things wrong and keep pushing on. So there we go. So I've still got to get the other side around. As you work one side more than the other, it'll twist, but you just bash it back. It's no big deal. Now I'm lifting with my left hand there, which you can't see very well in this video. Sorry about that. But I'm lifting with my left hand so that I'm driving that material down through the air onto the stake. You can see me readjusting where I am there. and I'm flattening it down, working that edge more than the other because I want to create that curve, but it's important obviously to get the other side across. There you go, you can see it's starting to break now across the shape there, and I'm going to have to add, as you'll see shortly, a bit more step to that heel because it's too flat at the moment. It looks horrible. Just made work for myself by not preparing very well at the beginning. There we go. What do we do now? Where are we getting to? Yeah, there we go. So we've got a nice heat. We're getting a bit more of that step in. It needs to be worked up into the muscle a bit more, but I wasn't there yet. I was concentrating on getting this bit sorted out. I'm lifting up with my hand there, try and get more of that curve in, but in the end I have to bite the bullet and work it from the other side again, over the pole, over the scaffold pole, into that groove. But it'll become clear, and I'm just working out those kinks and bits at the minute. You don't want one of those sort of creases to suddenly pucker up and fold back on itself, because you're screwed, and you more or less have to start again. So just teaching it to get round this thing at the moment. There you go. So you work that straight out. Don't let those creases drag the work. We're just teasing it around there rather than battering it down. Quick assessment. So on the straight bit there, has it got a twist? Yes, it has. And we'll work out how to get rid of those twists in just a moment. So I've done a lot of the roughing out now, and the basic form is beginning to take shape. I mean, the thing looks like it's having the living hell kicked out of it, and there isn't a curve there that I want. You can see it just sort of falls off, and that's just saying about the importance of really doing the dishing. I sort of again just rushed it a bit, so you can see, look, the comparison with the person's leg, there's a sweep, an elegance to the back of the leg, which I have across the crest of what we're currently looking at, but the side just falls off. So I've got to start to try and figure out what it is I want to do there. And the first thing I want to do is just sort of, I do this a fair bit, just sort of homogenize the shape, because which curve is the mistake? And I find this helps a lot with more or less any piece of work I do. When you get to this stage, just tidy it up a bit, and then you can take a look and go, right, where are the errors? I mean, that was a bit flat, so the technique I'm using here is to offer it up flat to the anvil, but then tilt it ever so slightly, so when the hammer blow strikes the metalwork, it's pushing it into a bit of space whilst the anvil is supporting another bit, and that will begin to help dish it a little bit. And you see I've just swapped up the hammer there because it was a bit heavy, I think, if I remember correctly. I could dream up a technical reason for it, but I think it was just hurting my hand. Just getting over elbow and shoulder injuries, and it was just hurting a bit too much. So you can see, look, I'm starting to drop that curve into that bit of it, and here I'm just tidying things up a bit. Check I'm using the right end of the hammer. It's got quite a nice curved head on it and then a flatter one, depending on what it is I'm trying to achieve. So I'm just trying to tidy that up. You see how I'm tilting my left hand down there as I go on the flat of the anvil to try and just preserve that curve. Obviously if I offer it up flat, it'll just end up with a flat thing. And I'm just tidying up the little kinks and dents that are in the edge, so that when I take a look at it in a minute and take an assessment of where I am, I can begin to see what's going on properly, rather than convincing myself something's happening and I make the wrong alteration. I was just checking the temperature of it there, see if it's glove hot. You see I'm saying there that we're beginning to see the two different muscle shapes that we require. There's like a long elegant sweep to the outside of a leg, and a little bunched, slightly higher muscle to the inside when you look at a leg straight on. So again, just tidying it up, getting rid of the worst bits and pieces, and putting in a little bit of that curve. It wasn't quite able to get it deep enough this way quickly enough, so I just put it back on the dishing form and knock it around in a bit. You can see I'm thinking there about the shape I want for the back of the top of the leg, and I want it a bit deeper and a bit broader there, so I'm just opening up the greave a bit here. I prefer to use this technique than just pushing it over something and opening it. You can do that, but then you run a risk of breaking the metal and sort of putting a crease in. You see, look, by lifting it up a bit there, I was able to start to try and get that edge down, but it wasn't enough, look. So we've got a bit of heat on, a couple of smacks either side of where I want to go, and then push that middle bit down. It will shrink the material a little bit, but not too much because we're on an edge. You can see the sides are flared out, and what you do is you walk those down and forwards, and it will help create the shape we're after, which is to cup the back of the top of the muscle. Stay on top of the kinks as they appear, as standard with any metalwork really, otherwise they'll suddenly fold and you'll have a cold shut or a cold shoulder, whatever you want to call it. You can see I'm just walking it down off the edge. There we go, down, pinging it down towards the edge, all the way down. Go on, no, let myself down there. Didn't take it all the way to the end. And I'm just making sure that the peak of the back of the muscle is actually in the back and not up the top. So I'm smoothing that down, there we go. You can see the peak of the muscle now is appearing more there. Gets smoothed out in a wee bit. Obviously a leg doesn't look quite like that. And the magic of editing, we're back on with a fresh heat. And not quite so rampant this time. Just trying to smooth it all out. Go on, all the way to the end. Don't be so lazy. Just checking I go. Go on, go on. And yeah, there we go. Close enough for government work. We've pushed that down. We're just tidying that up. I'll do a lot of tidying up from the inside. I'm sure I'll do most of my planishing. Just trying to check if I've got a curve in there I like. You can see that edge there, the curve about a quarter of the way down, is still quite flat, so we're going to need to revisit that. In fact, I think I spot it, if I recall, in a moment. What I tend to do when I spot things like that, you can see how flat it is there, look, on that edge closest to us. I'm trying to see if I can rectify that over this with next to no heat, I'll just give up. So it's onto the dishing stump, which appeared then magically. We'll see if we can get rid of that. But need to get, there we go, just there, it's flat. So I need to get some curvature into there. So I'm just homogenizing the, blending together the sweep up into the muscle and the sweep into the back of the Achilles. Try and tidy them up a bit. I find with a lot of this work, if you spend a bit of time tidying it up, when you look at it to assess where you are there twists, are there bits you've got to do, you can see them more readily. So it seems like you're spending more time, but actually I think you're saving time. You can see there again, I'm not satisfied with the back of that because I didn't spend the time at the beginning doing what I ought to do there. I'm really not satisfied that's out far enough, so I'll revisit that, which is why I'm chalking it when I spot it. Then we can get back to the case of just tidying this edge up. There we go. So there you go, nice little shot of the dishing stump, courtesy of the Iron Dwarf, I think it was, about 14 years ago. And I just want to drop the greave on the floor. I just want to deepen that muscle edge that I put in with the chalk. There it is there. So support the work and just tap it down. So to begin with, it's not too supported along that edge, so I can get a bit of depth in there, and then as I walk it up and support the edge of the greave on the wall of the piece there, and I can start to put a nicer curve into the bit of work there. It looks like I need a little bit more on the other side as well. So again, start it off and then walk it on to the support. There it is, walking it round and just get that sweep in there. It's not accurate yet, it's massive. This would fit Conan on after leg day at the moment, but we want that curvature in there, otherwise it will just be a flat horrible mess. Next on to the base by the heel. I think I'm trying to tell myself to do there. Just check that's not too hot. Be surprised how much they can retain heat. Learn that the hard way. At least I have. And we'll pop this stake back in. A couple of taps on top. There we go. Really simple stake to make that. Just a scaffold bowl. And a little bit of heat, and I'm just pulling that forward. I'm trying to get rid of that edit. I don't know why it's doing it. It keeps on pinging those in there, so we may have to let it roll on this one. Not an auspicious return to video editing, but I may just have to let it go for the minute. So I'm just drawing that forward, and this is why a lot of my stuff would crack, because I used to work it too cold too aggressively. But you see, I've worked the edge. There's like a box that you're working, and don't pull it from the middle, but you do the edges first, and you create essentially a box of stretched material, and then you can bring the middle towards it, and it won't crack. Or at least you reduce the chances of cracking. With a carbon steel, you'd be doing all this a nice glowing orange, but we've got mild steel on the go here, so it's a lot more forgiving and makes for a bit of a simpler video edit for me. Clearly I forgot to stop the video on this bit, so talk about the tool there for a moment until I come back with it. You can see it's just a standard scaffold pole. There's nothing clever about it. I heated that section in the middle and got a long length of metal into it and just pulled it over, and I bent it to about an inch higher than it is now, but it's just sort of settled there. There we go, look, into the middle bit that I was on about. So the two sides have been done, and then I'm just drawing that middle out and stretching it down, bearing in mind I'm going to lose about a half to an inch of the end of that and off the bottoms as well. I tend to make them a bit longer than I need to, just to give me some wriggle room for mistakes. And there you go, look, you can start to see that curvature is a bit better in there. And what I would normally start to do now is tidy up the ends of things there and get those working a bit more like they ought to. Curve them round, make sure they're not flat, and then start to work the front face, tidying it up and pushing that top part of the kick out in to the person's Achilles and the muscle there, and working that curved area again. I want this to bend, I want it to be flat. Greaves, one of those few pieces of armour in my opinion where from the ancient Greeks right the way up into the late medieval they really were works of art, and one of the few that retain the actual shape of the human. I think it's because the bones are so close to the skin, they just hobble you in moments if you get it wrong. So there we go, just flattening that down, tidying it up a little bit. But you can see that kick out now is much better. I'll still tidy it up a little bit, give it a bit more flair, but you can see it's starting to look like a greave, and we're removing those flats from the edges, which are important. And there we go, and a little bit more blending of the bottom half into the kick out for the calf muscle itself. It doesn't just appear from nowhere. Unless you're, if you want an 80s reference, unless you're somebody like Tom Platz or Arnold Schwarzenegger, your calves tend to blend nicely and they should have room to move, because the calves do take on quite a different shape depending on whether you've got your foot extended or not. So just helping the curve go in. I tend to find if you put the side that you want the most curve in against the stake or the anvil and strike the other side, that's the side you want to curve does curve more. We're just closing it down a little bit now, a few taps. There's no magic to this, just don't fold it in two. You just want to shrink the size of it down so you can start to see where you've got problems. So what I do now, exactly what I was saying before, is homogenize the shape a bit. You see I've got some kinks up the top there. I'm not really pulling that down so much, although it is a little bit. I'm just getting rid of these kinks and trying to tidy the shape up so it looks more like a U than anything else. There you go, my travelling planishing station. So I've sped this bit up because frankly it'd be as dull as dishwater just sitting there watching me planish forever. I tend to do a lot of the planishing from the inside, and there's that hammer again. I throttle it, hold it right up by the neck, get told off by all the blacksmiths I know for doing that. And it's got a nice weight, and the bit I'm hitting in the middle of that T-stake has got a slight depression to it, about 2 mil. And what that enables me to do is preserve curves nicely when I'm working them. So we're just tidying up the shape, just trying to make sure it doesn't go flat on the edges. That's what I'm checking for there. And if there's any major divots. This isn't a proper planish, this is just to sort of try and help rough it through a bit. Or sorry, take it away from the roughed out stage so that it's a bit tidier, so that when I try to get the final shape in there, I can see what I'm actually dealing with. To preserve a curve from the inside, that's a really handy tip. Do it across a T-stake like that from the inside, and where you're working on the stake either forwards or backwards will help preserve that curvature. You can see the greave starting to take shape now. Still got ankles and a whole load of work to do, but this video is just about how to rough the basic shape in. It's not a how to make greaves with beer forever. There you go, preserving that curvature or popping it in a little bit. Getting rid of a few dents I'm just spotting there in the blend from the top half to the bottom half. And there we are again, look, working that over the curve is a way of preserving that concave shape. And you go in there. The hammer there is an old bricklayer's escutcheon hammer that I took the ends off of and ground them round. It's really, really useful because it's got a nice curve to it. There we go, look, just drawing that out a little bit, using the smaller hammer there because I don't want to flatten it, so the smaller hammer will enable me to just move the little bit that I'm striking, and I should be able to dent it a little bit and kick it out just that touch more. So always thinking back to which muscles have got to go where and where I want the curvature. There we go. So it's not quite ready for grinding and polishing yet, but it ain't far. I'm just seeing there if I'm satisfied with those bits. And here we are with it offered up to the leg. I'm just about there now. It's tight, it needs work, but this video isn't about that. It's about how to achieve that basic shape. And it needs about 1/4 of an inch taken off of each edge as well, but I'll do that when I've offered the front up to it. If you've made it this far, thanks for persevering with the video. It's not the greatest and most auspicious return to YouTube, particularly after I got the lights and bits and pieces to increase the setup. But thank you for persevering with the video all this way. Obviously, for those of you that know me or follow the channel a little bit more than casually, you know, it's been a tough few months due to injury and sort of loss of father and so on. So sorry for having been away for quite a wee while, but thank you for watching this video through if you've made it here. And I will try to do some better ones coming up, but I just wanted to get something done, and this was what I had across the workbench at the time. I thought it would be a worthwhile experiment recording like this. So once again, thanks for persevering with it. Thank you for your patience and the sympathy. A few of you have passed on with the condolences, and we'll get to trying to make some more interesting and snappy videos shortly in the future. So take care, and see you on the next one.